Today I'm going to try to whip up about a month's worth of delicious freezer meals for my large family in just a few hours. Now, back in the spring, we did a big batch cooking day together, but this one's going to be quite a bit different because I'm going well beyond ingredient prep, which is what I usually do, and we're putting some full meals in the freezer. So if you've ever been curious about what it looks like to cook all day long and come up with some delicious, amazing meals for the entire month, hang out because I think you're going to love some of the recipes that I have to share. For several years, I have heard the advantages of making full meals for the freezer, but I have never actually gone that far. One of the main reasons is that my family is not a huge lover of all things casserole, and most of the time when I see big batch freezer cooked meals, there's a lot of casseroles involved. I don't have a plethora of 9x13 baking dishes, and I, on principle, am against aluminum. So if you've been around for a while, that's a whole nother story, but I'm not going to stock up on a bunch of basic things like glass pans and aluminum baking dishes just so I can put a bunch of food in the freezer. Well, today I want to show you my way around that. We're about to venture into a full day of work in the kitchen that is casserole free and going to put over 15 meals in my freezer so that my family can rely on those when we need something quick or when one of my pickiest eaters doesn't want to eat what's put on the table. So the first thing that I started off this meal plan with was a bunch of recipes that utilize similar ingredients. And I find this to be key to the success of a day like this. You want to be able to bulk prep a whole bunch of ingredients so that you can use them in multiple different ways and come up with a ton of different recipes at the end. So the first thing that I did was get out about 15 or 16, I think it was 16 pounds of ground beef and put them in my huge roasting oven. Now I did pull them out the day before, so they were about 50% thawed, and I added just a little bit of water so the steam would help to speed that process along. I am using a whole bunch of recipes that do utilize ground beef. If you want to substitute any other ground meat that you have at your house, whether that be for budget or just accessibility, like we're moving into deer season here, so we have a lot of venison coming in, those things are completely optional. And even oftentimes I'll mix a bunch of meats together so I get a higher content of fat from one and I'm able to balance out something that might be a little bit more dry. Now, I did mention that I put my meat in a roasting oven. That is not something that you have to have, although it does mean that you don't have to keep your eyes on it so close because it's not on the stove, and it allows you a little more flexibility to move on with other things that you might have going on in your kitchen. So for me on big bulk days, I really love that as an option. Moving on to the second recipe or the second ingredient of the day, we're looking at a King Arthur pizza crust. I really love bulk prepping pizza crust, wrapping it up and freezing it. So I'm going to show you all the steps that go along with that. But this crust makes really beautiful pizza. It also makes great dessert recipes, just depending on if you add or don't add the Italian seasoning to your dough. So lots of flexibility by having a few pizza crusts ready to go in the oven. Now, the next thing that I'm going to show you is pie crust. This is going to be the last pastry / flour type option of the day. Other than that, we're moving on to a whole bunch of those meat ingredients. But while that meat's browning up, it's the perfect time to put together some pie crust. I am going to use these for turkey or chicken pot pie. We have leftover turkey from the Thanksgiving meal that I prepped here at the house a couple of weeks ago. So I am using that turkey at this time to make a beautiful turkey pot pie. Now, the thing that is super important here is to make sure that your butter is really cold or almost frozen. So I cut my butter and then put it in the freezer for about 10 or 15 minutes while I was moving on to the other room to work on the pizza crust, and that allowed it to come together really beautifully and make sure that I'm going to get those beautiful flaky layers in the crust. Now, if you are considering a day like this, the very most important thing you can do is be prepared. That involves figuring out the recipes that you want, making a list, and it also involves putting those ideas together. And for me, I am absolutely a paper girl and I hate a scratched up notebook. So lately I've been taking advantage of a software system called Kittle, where I can make the forms that I want and personalize them for my home. I've used them for everything from chore management to the kids to making a meal plan and prep guide for what I'm using today. Now, I can tell you, I was able to come in, move everything around, make a sheet that looked right for me, and customize the categories to be something that I wanted personally. The best part is I could print it right from my home. Not only has Kittle helped me out on my home management side, but they also offer a variety of homeschool templates that I've been able to customize and print straight in my home. So if you're interested in anything from t-shirt design to Christmas cards, make sure to check out my link below and use promo code HHomesteadYT to take 25% off of your first month or year with any paid plan. And thank you again to Kittle for sponsoring today's content and changing the way I manage my home. Okay, the next order of business is getting out some frozen Mexican pork that I had shredded a few weeks ago with you here on the channel when we made some delicious crockpot recipes. This pork was absolutely delicious and fed my family several meals, so I just put it in the freezer. And today I'm turning it into pork chimichangas. Now, my family love a chimichanga. I love to bake them off in the oven instead of fry them. A, it's healthier, but B, I just hate the mess that comes along with frying. It's something that I try to avoid at almost all costs here in my kitchen. But making these chimichangas are so simple, especially when the meat is already in the freezer from a previous cook. So all you have to do is put some cheese in there. I shredded up some pepper jack, basically. You can use regular cheddar, just depending on the taste of your family. My pork was already seasoned, so I didn't even have to season it. And I added a little bit of salsa to make it come together. I'm scooping it out on some tortilla shells here, as you can see, and then just rolling them up. After they're rolled up, I'm putting them straight into a Ziploc. When I have a time or a day when we're ready to eat this, I'm going to take them out of the freezer in the morning, probably the morning that we're going to eat them, let them thaw, and then place them straight in a 9x13 baking dish. I'm going to top the top with some oil so that they brown really beautifully. And then when they come out, we'll sprinkle them with a little bit of cheese, put some salsa on top, maybe some lettuce and sour cream, and we'll have a beautiful meal ready to go in the time that it takes to warm them up in the oven. I am a huge fan of putting leftovers like this away for another day. I did the same thing when I made a huge brisket several months back, and we've been able to pull that meat out and use it anytime we want to, and it's just been a really nice addition to the house. So don't look away from those larger cuts of meat. They can actually save you quite a bit of money over getting smaller cuts, and you can get multiple meals out of them, even if you don't want to eat it all at one time. If you want to split it up just by putting a meal or two's worth of meat back in the freezer, it comes in super handy for days like this when you're ready to recreate it and give it a totally new life that your family will absolutely love. One quick tip on the storage and usability of everything that you're putting away: make sure to write the ingredients for reheating it right on the bag so you don't have to go looking for a specific recipe to know how to finish off your product. So on this bag, I wrote the time and temperature needed for the oven, as well as any other directions for all of the other ones that we do have left. I also wrote on top of the tin foil that I'm going to use in a little bit on top of those chicken pot pies that we started the crust for earlier. Make sure to write on anything foil wise before it gets moist or anything. So if you're putting it in the refrigerator for a little bit of time to cool, make sure to write on it before you actually put it in there, because when it comes out, it's a little bit harder to write on. Okay, this next recipe is something that I'm actually quite excited about, and I'm going to share it with you now. It's lasagna roll-ups. So it's not an actual lasagna. And the reason I decided to do that is because I want to be able to pull out 1 or 2 portions at a time if needed, instead of making a whole 9x13 baking dish. I really think that that's the beauty of freezer meals, is being able to customize sizes and make sure portions can be as large or small as you need them on any given day. While we do have a large family, that doesn't mean that we're all going to be home to eat at the same time, especially heading into basketball season. We might end up having practice 2 nights a week. It might be 4 nights a week. Who knows? The sky's really the limit at this point. So I'm preparing for all possibilities. These roll-ups are really simple to put together. It's basically just a regular lasagna recipe, except instead of layering it all in a 9x13, we're going to cook to al dente the noodles and then put water on them to go ahead and stop that cooking process. They will get more soft as they cook down the road, so you don't want to cook them all the way to super soft at this point. Once those are cooling over on the side, I went ahead and put my sauce together. Now you can make your own sauce, but I love this organic pizza sauce that I get from Azure Standard, and I just add a few extra ingredients to turn it into a pasta sauce. So it really doubles for me on many, many ways, and I'll make sure to link that down below because I do find that it's super easy to use. Now, once I've done that, I went ahead and put some of the meat that I had in my big roasting oven over into the pan with the sauce. And now we're moving on to make our grated Parmesan. Now, I don't buy Parmesan already grated. I just buy a big block of Parmesan, and it is the hardest thing ever to grate on like a regular grater, but I love to just throw it in the bottom of my food processor, not to try it through the grating blades because that will not work. But throw it in the bottom and just grind it up until you get the powdered form that you're looking for. Buying cheeses like this in bulk and then just preparing them the way that you would like yourself saves a ton of money over buying that same cheese in a pre-grated form. Plus, it keeps it fresh way longer in the refrigerator. So now I'm just measuring out exactly what I need and putting the rest away because I did have more than I needed here, but I went ahead and shredded up the rest of the block just so I can sprinkle what's left on top after we warm these up as we eat them along the way. So super helpful. Now I'm adding an egg to it, or my little one did there. She cracked the egg herself. She's very insistent on being the egg helper most of the time. And we're adding some ricotta cheese. Now, I have not mentioned it yet, but just like always, I will put all of these recipes for you down in the comments. So don't worry about keeping track of what I'm doing. If you see something that you are interested in, it will definitely be down there. Now, once I have that all mixed up, it's super simple. You just lay out your noodles, then you're going to spread a layer of the cheese mixture and then a layer of the sauce mixture. Now, as you can see here, my tiny assistant is quite independent. She was adamant that she could handle this herself. And at first I was a little nervous thinking there'd be quite a mess. But the truth is, if she's in the kitchen with me having fun, that's what matters. And to my absolute surprise, she was very clean with this entire process. She wasn't covered in it herself by the end. We had exactly enough to finish all of the roll-ups, and she was very detailed and very thorough when it was done. The one thing I did not let her do is I did not let her roll them up, much to her absolute dismay, but they turned out really, really nice. Once I have these all rolled up, I covered them with plastic wrap, left them on this tray, and put them in my deep freeze. The idea was to just do a flash freeze. So I got them pretty cold or cold enough to handle without any of the insides coming out. And then I was going to move them on this specific day on into a Ziploc. Using Ziplocs to store something like this instead of having the 9x13 in there is a really big hit because we can still take advantage of the pan space that we have if we want to cook something in between. For my family, we will not eat a freezer meal every single night of the month, so that's not an issue. And that's why 15 or 16 freezer meals will last my family a month, and honestly, probably quite longer, because it often is the case that I do have time to cook meals and prepare them for my family on any given day. So these are going to be meals that I pull out when I don't have time. I have errands going on, I have a business meeting or something of that sort. And it really is just a huge time saver for me then, but won't be something that we rely on day to day. Now, I will say, if I worked out of the home after having freezer meals in my freezer for a couple weeks and being able to have that freedom and flexibility to just pull something out when I need it, I would absolutely do this once or twice a month and have every night's meal taken care of and prepped well in advance. I think that is totally doable. And especially if you have some help. Now, my 3-year-old isn't really the best help in this situation, but if you grabbed a friend, a sister, a cousin, and had an extra set of hands in the kitchen and were able to really tackle these tasks hands-on with adults at the same time, you could knock out so much food in one day that it would be absolutely amazing. Now my pizza crust has come together. It has had time to have its first rise. I brought it all the way through the first rise, and now I'm going to cut it up and put it away. I have 4 pizza crusts here. I mixed all of them in my mixer at the same time. Depending on the size of your mixer, you might have to do 1 or 2 batches. It just, whatever works for the equipment that you have is totally fine. Now, I should weigh these out if I want them to be precise, but I don't really care. I just divided them by 4, wrapped them up, and you have to get them straight in the freezer. If you don't, they will pop that plastic wrap and start to go ahead and proof right out of it. So you want to make sure you get them cold as soon as possible so that you don't have any issues with them overproofing and not rising effectively in the end. I will also say, when you are doing any sort of dough and you're going to freeze it, it's a great idea to add a little extra yeast or sourdough starter, whatever you're using, because it is going to be slower than normal coming out of that frozen state. Okay, with the pizza crust put away, it's time to turn our attention over to the stove. And as you can see, that list is literally keeping my mind straight. I have 4 different pots and pans going. I have a multitude of recipes, and having all of the ingredients written down for what I need lets me keep it all straight. I honestly wish I could have labeled each pot and pan to make sure and help myself keep them straight. But of course, that's not quite easy. I could have made a map, I guess, on the back of my sheet. Maybe that's something I'll add next time. So I know where everything is just for that purpose, because it did get a little bit hectic at this time. One of the major reasons that things got a little bit wild here in our kitchen is because my guys had been out hunting all day, and they're going to come in right about the time I have a lot going on over here on the stove. I did start my bulk cook day a little bit later than I would recommend anybody else starting it. I started about 3 o'clock in the afternoon because I was really busy all morning, but I wanted to get a jump start on it and get it done. So if you are going to take this on at home, make sure to start a little bit earlier in the day, and then you won't have everything coming to a head right at dinner time. That said, when they came in hungry, I obviously had lots of options. So the first thing that I wanted to do there is make sure all of my seasonings and spices were up to date. I did refill my homemade taco seasoning as well as chili seasoning before I moved on to this step. And if you don't know how to make those bulk spices, I'll make sure to link that at the end, because it is so easy to mix those up really fast and just have everything that you need at the same time. Now, the first recipe that I'm making here is the bottom meat layer with some beans for a hot Mexican layer dip. This is absolutely delicious, a huge hit for the whole family. And all you have to do is season some meat up with some taco seasoning, add some onions, and then add a can of black beans. So for the meat portion, it is super easy. I have it already off the stove, overcooling on the side. And I'm moving on to a Philly cheesesteak burger. If you haven't tried this before, I highly recommend it. Like, can't recommend it enough. This is the one that everybody came to the minute they got home and could not wait to get their hands on. So the first thing I did was brown some onions and peppers straight out of my garden in my pan and got them all softened up. Once I got that done, I added several scoops of ground beef and then some cream cheese right to the top. I'm letting it all mix in, letting the cream cheese melt. You can just put the lid on it and let it set for a little bit. Come back and stir it up, and it is such an amazing flavor profile. You also want to salt it to taste, and then you can add some slices of provolone on top, which really helps to kind of stick it all together once you put it on that little bun. And I'll make sure to put in a clip here so you can see exactly what that one looks like in the final product. My husband actually said he wished I wasn't forcing them to put some of it in the freezer because they could have eaten the whole thing that night. So the next time I do a big prep day like this and put away some freezer meals, I'm going to focus way heavier on this specific dish. I went a little bit lighter just because it's not something that we commonly go to all the time, but the flexibility of having it available and how much my family loves it is definitely a reason to up the ingredient count just a little bit so I can have 3 or 4 servings in the freezer instead of just 1 or 2. In the other 2 pans, I have our taco soup that is just so delicious at this time of year. And also I'm making a huge pot of chili. And when I say huge, I'm talking huge for my family. I am putting about 6 or 7 pounds of meat in here, multiple cans or jars of beans, as well as tomatoes. Same thing for my taco soup, getting it all in and all done at the same time. Now we're going to jump back over to that Mexican layer dip while I have the chili and the taco soup stewing over on the stove. The first thing I did was spread out the meat and bean base. Then I'm adding sour cream. After it's spread out, I am going to add a little bit of salsa. Now that's up to you. If you don't want any tomato product in there, you don't have to. Or if you still have some fresh ones left, which I know I did at this point last year, you can chop those up and throw them on top also. For us, we love the flavor that the salsa adds. So I'm just putting a few dollops of that on top, spreading it out a little, and then using, again, shredded cheese that I've already shredded up here at home from cheese that I bought in bulk. This is an organic raw cheese that I get from Azure Standard, and it is so good. And I can buy it in 5-pound blocks way cheaper than I could get the same quality cheese in a smaller quantity or at a local store. So if you're looking for super high quality products, I'll make sure to drop my Azure link down below because they are a huge benefit, especially when it comes to products like dairy for my family. With my late start in the day and the extensive list of options that I had to prepare, I did decide to go ahead and wrap it all up and spend the evening with my family who had just got home from their hunting adventures for the full day instead of working the night away. So I am picking this back up the next day, and we are going to roll out those beautiful pie crusts that we made together yesterday. Now, this is a full butter pie crust. I have done all different versions, or I should say I've had all different versions. The one with shortening is what I grew up on, but I was reading about this butter recipe and how flaky the dough was supposed to turn out. And I have to say I was absolutely not disappointed. We saved out, I'm going to kind of cheat and jump forward to the end. I did not put one of the 2 pot pies that I'm making right now in the freezer. I put it in the refrigerator so we could have it the following day because we had a busy evening planned, and I thought it would be really great to go ahead and try one of these out. This crust is so flaky and so beautiful that my kids said it tasted like a croissant. And what they meant by that was the light, airy, beautiful flavor that we had when we recently had those croissants from Wild Green. Those things were so flaky and so crispy and beautiful on the outside, but yet soft on the inside. And that's exactly the flavor they got from my crust that I made for the pie. So I was super happy with the way that turned out. Highly do recommend this recipe. Again, I'll make sure to link it down below. But this pot pie came together so fast and easy after I had the crust rolled out. And the main reason for that is because I do love to advance prep single ingredients. So I already had cut up carrots and I already had onions that were already chopped and ready to go. The one thing I still needed to do was the celery and to pull some of this turkey left off the bone. Now, I am using turkey, as I mentioned before, just based on leftovers that I had from our Thanksgiving meal that I put up last week. And if you haven't taken a look at that, this spatchcock turkey turned out so delicious. I highly recommend it because it cut down on the cooking time so much. And we've been able to pull it into 4 amazing leftover meals recently. And I can't wait to show you more of that a little bit later. With the crust rolled out and everything that I needed prepped and ready to go, all I had to do was go over and get it warmed up and put together on the stove. Now, this actually came together super easy. All I did was take some butter and get it warmed up, then added the turkey until it was warmed through and sprinkled it with a couple tablespoons of flour to get a nice roux mixture going before slowly adding some milk and making sure to flavor it to taste. Once I put all of those vegetables in there and really let that simmer down on the stove for a little bit until I got the texture that I was looking for, I went ahead and let it cool. Now that is super important because you don't want to pour it piping hot into the pie crust that's made with butter. You don't want to go ahead and melt things there in advance, specifically because I am making these for freezer meals or cooking them the day after. Now it is still pretty hot, but it's not as hot as it was when it first came off the stove. So I did mention that I made 2. As you can see, this second one isn't actually a pie pan. Again, I don't keep a bunch of extras around in that sort of thing. So I'm using a large round casserole dish. This doesn't have the same edges of a pie crust. And I decided that it would be the perfect one for the freezer because I was able to tuck the extra edge of the crust down inside. So it stacks really nicely without crunching down on the beautiful crust that I'm putting together right now. Once the filling was in, I went ahead and unfolded the tops that I had rolled out earlier. I had just folded them into quarters and made sure there was enough flour on them to where they didn't stick and put them in the bottom of the pie pans until I was ready. So I am rolling this under, and I'm actually trying out a new technique, which is something that I saw online recently that I thought was so cool and so beautiful. So once I got this all rolled under, I'm going to spread out my whole hand like you see me doing here and pull the portion in between my fingers toward me. And it turned out to be the most beautiful fluted edge. And it was so simple. Most typically I will just pinch them. And that's the way I always did it growing up and what I always saw done. But this looked like a gorgeous ruffle on top, and it really was something that was impressive. So if you have this space on top and you can use that finger trick, I think it'll turn out really nice. After that, I added some vent holes, and then I let them set out for a while before I moved them onto the freezer. Now, one thing that is super important when you are putting something like this in the freezer is the first thing is you want to put some plastic wrap on top because you want extra layers of insulation instead of just moving straight to the aluminum foil. Now, I do use aluminum foil exceptionally sparingly in my kitchen. Actually, the freezer is the only way that I do use it. I don't use it to cover anything. I don't like aluminum foil heated on my food. That is a personal thing that is important for my family. I'm pretty sparing with the plastic wrap as well. I don't like any of it heated in any circumstance at all. So once this cooled off, I went ahead and wrapped it with the plastic wrap first. Then I'm putting the foil on it. And then I'm going to put it in the freezer. Now, like I mentioned earlier, you do want to go ahead and write on this at this point. So I put the temperature to bake it at as well as the time on top with my Sharpie. And then we were able to move these all over to their specific location. The first one, as I mentioned before, we did eat the following night. And this other one is going downstairs into my basement freezer. Now, I don't know about where you're at, but here in Missouri, we are definitely in a time change area. And this was the weekend that the time changed. It gets early, so dark now. So my light was totally gone. I'm going to have to readjust my shooting schedule and make sure that I'm getting some good light on the subject. But it was time to go ahead and finish putting everything into portions that would go into the freezer. Now, my chili is what I'm working with here. I went ahead and got 3 huge bags full, ready to go. This is something that we rely on a lot in the fall. It's also something that is super great to have when my kids want to go with like a chili dog or something of that sort. So not only will we use this just for regular chili, but we have chili dog options, and then we can also use it when we're making nachos. So chili is something that is a huge fall favorite around my house. So having this available and frozen is super important. There is one key to freezing something like this, and for me, it's to make sure that I'm laying it super flat. This way, everything stacks nicely once you get it into the freezer, which is a huge, huge win. But in order to do that, you need to make sure that your bags are cleaned off so you don't have anything that's going to stick them together when you go to pull them apart. So not only do you want to make sure that your bags are really clean and, of course, labeled, but then get them dry and lay them flat. Once I do this, I like to go ahead and score them with my hand in about 4 different blocks in order to make sure that when I go to pull them out of the bag, I can break them easily into chunks that will easily fit into a pan. If you freeze them in the whole size of the bag, it's not that big of a deal. It just means you need a little bit more advanced planning or a really huge pan, because most pans won't fit the size of an entire Ziploc bag into the pan with the lid on, or even without portions of the sides hanging off. Okay, now turning my attention back to these roll-ups. I mentioned before that the idea was to flash freeze them just for a little bit and then put them in Ziplocs. But of course, the night got away from me, my kiddos came home, and I decided to put a stop into that. So they are fully frozen, rock solid and hard on this pan. And of course, they're all stuck together. So it took a little bit of work and prying to get them off, but it was totally doable. And we ended up with 2 full meals worth of these roll-ups out of 1 recipe. So that is going to be a huge hit added to the freezer. Now that I've showed you some of my favorites, I would love it if you would drop in the comments below your favorite freezing meals, and maybe in the future, I'll get to make those and put them in my freezer as well. As for today, and since I made this content, my kitchen process has been so streamlined, and I've been able to put meals on the table with minutes in the kitchen and way less cleanup than normal. So that is a huge win. I want to thank you for stopping by my kitchen today, and also remind you to check out that link in the description for Kittle. It is so nice to have forms set up the way I want to manage my kitchen. So thanks again for stopping by, friends, and I'll see you back soon.